Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to AJ102 Introduction to Criminal Justice. My name is Tony Farrar, and of course, I am your instructor for this semester. So, this week's lecture is going to cover Chapter 3, where we're going to take a look at crime and victimization. So, a lot of information to cover, so let's go ahead and just jump right into our lecture. So, a couple of the learning objectives. We want to be able to, first of all, take a look at, figure out, ascertain why some experts believe that crime is actually rational. Is there some kind of thought process behind it? We're going to classify some of the strategies used to reduce crime by rational criminals, identify the various biological traits that are linked to crime, describe some of the physiological views of the causes of crime, identify the personality traits that are linked to crime, compare and contrast the various social structure theories of crime, distinguish among the three types of social process theories, explain the meaning of critical criminology, discuss the basics of developmental theory, and then finally identify some of the various theories that are connected to victimization. So a lot of information to cover. So again, we're just going to go ahead and jump right in. So why do some people commit crime while others, who are part of the same family, let's say, and live in the same community, remain law-abiding? So that's always an interesting thing, right? So we're going to start off this chapter with kind of a question. Despite years of study and research, crime experts are not certain what drives certain specific people to commit crime. However, the media is full of speculation regarding the factors that promote crime and what, quote, makes a criminal, right? So crime is a topic on which many people think that they're an expert at this, but actually they're not. But anyway, so a couple of questions for you to think about as we go through the chapter. What factors are suggested by the media as leading to crime? If you asked friends and family, what would they say leads to crime? And perhaps as a student of criminology, if you've taken a criminology course, do you agree that these factors lead to crime? And if you are interested in criminology itself, AJ112 Introduction to Criminology is a great class to take. And the reason it's great is because it's my favorite subject and I love to teach it. So anyway, so let's kind of, again, we'll jump into the chapter while you're thinking about that. So why do some people commit crime while others, even if they're in the same house, do not? Now, to find an answer to this question, criminologists, they study the nature, extent, and cause and control of criminal behavior. So there's a lot there when it comes to criminology. I mean, think about it. Why do people do what they do? Just that statement alone is super interesting. So by definition, criminologists are social scientists who use the scientific method to study the nature, extent, cause, and control of criminal behavior. And they study crime patterns in part to help agents, which would be law enforcement officers that fall under the criminal justice system, to plan and construct programs to help reduce crime. So criminology is kind of a interdisciplinary type thing. It's broad. And you can look at the picture on the right here and you can see that there's so many things that fall underneath this table of criminology, right? So a lot of different things that come into play. But now we're going to kind of talk about one of the major theories when it comes to causes of crime. And that is choice theory. So rather than being unthinking and spontaneous, most crimes involve thought and planning that are designed to maximize personal gain and avoid capture and punishment. People, under choice theory, people choose to commit crime after weighing the potential benefits and the consequences of their criminal actions, okay? So again, according to choice theory, while most of us work hard to become successful, there are some that are greedy, immoral individuals who don't hesitate to use illegal means to get what they want. And these rational criminals, again, they weigh the potential benefits and consequences of their acts. So, kind of moving on, people will commit a crime if they believe it will provide immediate benefits without the threat of long-term risks. If the rewards are great, the perceived risks small, and the excitement high, the likelihood of committing additional crimes increases. So they do ask themselves, they think, right? They weigh those cost-benefit risk. And then they might ask themselves, well, what are the chances of getting caught? And how difficult is it to commit the crime? Is it a burglary suspect that's climbing through a second-story window versus a lower floor door or something like that? So, you have to look at all of those things. And under, rational choice theory, or choice theory for short, this is what they think about. So again, crime is a matter of rational choice involving a calculated decision made after a motivated offender weighs the potential cost and benefits of illegal activity. So the decision to commit a specific crime is a matter of personal decision based on the evaluation of available information. And haven't you ever done this? I mean, you look at the picture here, you've got just kind of an interesting little kind of cartoon, if you will, but good and bad. How many times have you, as an individual, tried to make a decision and maybe you made a list? You weighed the good and the bad. And some of you may have actually written out that list. And so, this is how choice theory kind of works and how they think. So again, before deciding to commit that crime, the reasoning criminal evaluates the risk of apprehension, the seriousness of expected punishment, and the potential value or benefit of the criminal enterprise, right? How much am I going to get? And his or her ability to succeed. So crime then is avoided when that risk outweighs the reward. And that kind of makes sense. It's like anything else, right? You kind of look at something and you decide, nah, I don't know if I'm going to do that because it might be dangerous. It might be this, it might be that. So the risk, kind of outweighs whatever it is that you're thinking about. So kind of just giving you a little bit more. When we talk about, rational crimes. So, these are crimes that can be observed in a wide variety of events. So, that crime is rational, again, can be observed in a wide variety of events. And we talk about things like white-collar and organized crime figures engage in elaborate and well-planned out conspiracies, ranging from drug deals to, kiddie porn, to pornography, conspiracy, etc. So, they engage in these large things. But even predatory street criminals sometimes they exhibit stealth and planning in their acts, right? Now, not all the time, but sometimes they do. Burglars may try to determine which house or which homes are the easiest to target, with less lighting outside, or only a single story, different things that they're actually going to plan, right? Easy access, screened away from public view, maybe a good escape route or something like that. And even violent criminals that maybe commit robberies, etc., sometimes they exhibit elements of rationality in a sense that they might, you know, choose their targets, maybe closer to home in areas that they routinely travel in, right? Being familiar with the area gives them the knowledge to escape, so this is kind of their awareness space. And robbers also report being wary of people who are, watching, the community for signs of trouble. If there's 2 or 3 people, they might not try to rob that person, if there's only one. So a lot of different things kind of come into play, right? And finally, others, might select targets that are known to do primarily cash business, like places like bars or supermarkets or restaurants. So, if crime is a rational choice, then how can it be prevented or controlled? Because it appears under this theory that criminals do a lot of times think about what they're going to do. And this is probably the best photo that I could put up that really explains the choice theory. Is it worth grabbing the cheese? The mouse puts on the helmet, for protection, but that's a pretty big piece of cheese. But he's going to weigh that on whether or not he's going to get caught or killed or what have you. He's tried to minimize things by putting on the helmet, but you can see this is kind of one of those decisions, and criminals do make decisions. And under choice theory, it's very evident that they believe that there's a thought process behind this. So some advocates of rational choice theory argue that crime prevention can be achieved by reducing the opportunities people have to commit crime. It's a technique that's called or defined as situational crime prevention. Okay? And it was first popularized in the 1970s by Oscar Newman, who basically came up with the term defensible space. The idea here is that crime can be prevented or displaced using certain architectural designs that reduce criminal opportunity. And it's kind of evolved over the years. It's now called crime prevention through environmental design, or the short kind of acronym is called CPTED. Okay? So again, situational crime prevention can be achieved by creating a strategy to reduce specific crimes and then developing certain tactics to achieve those goals. So it's kind of an interesting thought, right? So when you look at these two pictures, when you look at the photo on the left, you can see it's kind of dark and the lights aren't that great, but on the right, it's super lit up. It'd be the same thing for maybe an underground parking area that has, no lighting, or all the lights are burnt out, compared to one that's, well lit, maybe some cameras. This is all that kind of falls underneath that CPTED, or, situational crime prevention, etc. So here are a couple of main types of crime prevention strategies that Ronald Clark has set out in a couple of his research papers. So first would be to increase the effort needed to commit the crime. Increasing the effort needed to commit crimes involves using what we call target hardening techniques and access control, maybe putting a steering lock on a car, the club, or putting unbreakable glass on a storefront, or locking gates, etc. So that's kind of, again, that's increasing the effort, right, to commit that crime. Next would be increase the risks of committing the crime. So it is also possible to increase the risks of committing a crime by improving, let's say, surveillance lighting, creating neighborhood watch programs, controlling building entrances and exits, putting in burglar alarms and security systems, or even private security. So all of these increase the risk. Next would be reduce the rewards for committing crime. So reward reduction strategies might include making expensive goods and valuables in the secondary market, cutting down on criminal profits, etc. So just a couple of interesting thought there. Next would be induce shame or guilt. And this might include such techniques as embarrassing offenders, like publishing what we call John lists in the newspaper to punish those individuals arrested for soliciting prostitution, etc. So a couple of things there. Reducing provocation. Some crimes are the result of extreme provocation, like road rage. So it might be possible to reduce provocation by creating programs that reduce conflict. And again, these are ideas. Some of them probably make a little more sense than some of the other ones. And then finally, remove excuses. So crime may be reduced by making it difficult for people to excuse their criminal behavior by saying things like, I didn't know that was illegal, or I didn't have a choice, etc., right? So these are just some ideas. And again, strategies, main types of prevention strategies for situational crime prevention. So now we're going to take a quick look at general deterrence. Okay, and remember, we're talking about understanding crime, and then towards the end of the chapter, we're going to throw in victimization. So if crime is a matter of choice, it follows that it can be controlled by convincing criminals that breaking the law is bad or dangerous. It's a bad or dangerous choice to make, right? If people believe that they are certain to be arrested, apprehended by police, quickly tried, and then severely punished, they are less likely to commit the crime. And that falls under kind of the terminology of general deterrence. So general deterrence is designed to make potential criminals fear the consequences of crime, right? So the harsher the punishment, the more certain its application, and the speedier the judgment, the more effective this general deterrence principle would be. Okay, does that kind of make sense? So, when you talk about fear of being punished, etc., it could be the death penalty. But really, when you read about the death penalty, and I'll let you kind of answer this on your own, has the death penalty really diminished, or do we now have less individuals that kill people? I mean, it's scary to know that if you killed someone, etc., a capital murder case, you could be sentenced to the death penalty, but does that make people not want to do it? So again, an interesting thought. It's kind of like this, and I always like to throw something kind of funny in there. When people do all kinds of things, and that when you've got that frozen pole, when you stick your tongue on there, it's going to stick, but yet people do it anyway. And they know that it's going to maybe cut your tongue or stick or whatever, but you still do it. So people do kind of still do things. So to kind of finish up, people who fear punishment under this theory of general deterrence will be deterred from committing certain crimes. Even the most committed offenders, such as gang members, could forego criminal activities if they fear those legal punishments. Now, the prevailing wisdom here is that the certainty of being punished is a greater deterrent to crime than its severity. If law enforcement can be more proactive, cracking down on crime, potential criminals will become maybe wary of wanting to do that and may choose not to commit crimes. Now, there's another kind of term out there, and this is called specific deterrence. So even the threat of punishment a lot of times cannot deter criminals, right? Actual punishment at the hands of the justice system should be sufficient enough to convince arrested individuals never to repeat their criminal acts. If punishment were severe enough, a convicted criminal would never dare to repeat his or her offense. What rational person would, right? And this viewpoint is called specific deterrence. So again, this is a strategy to punish known criminals so severely that they won't do it again. They won't repeat the offense. The sentence is so harsh that they've learned their lesson and they won't go back out and do that again. But this relies on the belief that experience will shape their choice. It assumes that those who have been caught and punished will soon learn, that phrase, crime does not pay. Now, problems with these strategies are that criminals a lot of times don't fear punishment, and the certainty of arrest and punishment is low sometimes. Techniques include the death penalty, mandatory sentences, aggressive policing, etc. But a lot of times we know that sometimes criminals just do, what they're going to do. So that's a little bit on specific deterrence. And when you talk about murder rates, again, so this is a chart that shows murder rates in states that have death penalty as compared to non-death penalty states. Now, it only goes to 2016, but let's look at this because it's interesting. The dark red, these are death penalty states, and the kind of lighter, kind of the pink, if you will, non-death penalty. So you would think that, murder rates would be higher in non-death penalty states, right? Take a look and tell me what you see. Kind of interesting, right? And this is all part of criminology. So again, don't forget AJ112. It's a great class. Okay, so let's go ahead and kind of move on a little bit. And on page 91 and 92 in your textbook, it actually kind of compares general deterrent strategies, specific deterrent strategies, along with situational crime prevention. There's kind of a little chart there. So you can take a look at that, as you want. So now we're going to talk a little bit about trait theory. Okay, or different trait theories, if you will. So people may develop physical or mental traits at birth or soon thereafter that affect their social functioning over the life course and influence their behavior choices. Okay, and so behavior might have both a biological and a sociological element. Hence the term, as we'll talk about more, sociobiological or biosocial theories. So at the turn of the 19th century, as it ended, some criminologists began to suggest that crime was caused not so much by choice, but by inherited and uncontrollable biological and psychological traits. The origin of scientific criminology is usually traced back to an individual and research of an individual by the name of Cesar Lombroso. Okay, so you can kind of trace the origins all the way back to him. And again, part of trait theory is that people may develop physical or mental traits at birth or shortly afterward that affect their social functioning over their life. So behavior has, again, possibly has both biological and sociological elements. And that's where we come up with sociobiological or biosocial theories. It is possible then that while biochemical makeup influences behavior, some social factors can mitigate its effects. So again, some very interesting things for us to think of. And remember, again, we're talking about understanding crime. So we talked about choice theory. Now we're talking about trait theory, and we're going to talk about biochemical factors. So biocriminologists sometimes focus on the influence of biochemical factors on criminal behavior. And it is believed that ingestion or exposure to toxic, harmful substances, chemicals, etc., poor diet, etc., and beyond may affect people throughout their life course. Okay? And such factors can either trigger or make people susceptible to hostile or aggressive responses. Thus, people who are exposed to toxic biochemical substances may be more likely than others to take hostile action when exposed to certain stressful events. And these suspected biochemical influences, on behavior consist of a couple different categories that we're going to look at. We're going to look at environmental contaminants, food products, hypoglycemia, and hormones. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but we're going to kind of touch on each one, okay? And then we'll jump into neurological. So talk about environmental. Exposure to environmental contaminants such as, PCBs, a chemical that was used in insulation materials, as well as, lead, mercury, other metals, has been shown to influence brain functioning and intelligence levels. And exposure to these contaminants could lead to cognitive and learning dysfunctions, factors that are kind of associated with antisocial behavior. And when you talk about food, food products, some research efforts have linked antisocial behavior to vitamin and mineral deficiencies, food additives, and even improper diet. Ingestion of common food additives like calcium propionate, that's used to preserve bread, has been linked to problem behaviors. Okay, so a couple of different things for us to think about. Hypoglycemia, another area of biological research focuses on hypoglycemia, a condition that occurs when someone's blood sugar falls below the levels necessary for normal and efficient brain functioning. And some symptoms might include irritability, anxiety, depression, headaches, confusion, etc., right? So, these are all possibilities. And then finally, hormones. One area of concern has been testosterone, the most abundant male hormone, androgen, which controls, secondary sex characteristics such as facial hair and voice. Excessive levels of testosterone have been linked to violence and aggression. And children who have low levels of the stress hormone, cortisol, tend to be more violent and antisocial than those with normal levels. So, this is a little bit of an overview as it relates to biological factors. And then we have neurological factors. So some researchers suspect that the cause of abnormal neurological function is impairment in neurotransmitters, which are chemical compounds that influence or activate brain functions. And the presence of brain abnormality causes irrational and destructive behavior. Research has also shown that youth with ADHD who grow up in a somewhat dysfunctional family are the most vulnerable to chronic delinquency that continues all the way into adulthood. So, again, studies of habitually violent criminals show that low serotonin levels are linked with poor impulse control, hyperactivity, increased irritability, and even sensation seeking. Okay, so again, when you talk about neurotransmitters, studied in relation to aggression include things like dopamine, serotonin, monoamine, oxidase, and gamma. There's a lot of different things that we could kind of throw in here, but these are some that are neurological factors. Well, what about genetic factors? Although the earliest biological studies of crime, tried and failed to discover a genetic basis for criminality, modern biocriminologists are concerned with the role of heredity in producing crime-prone individuals. Okay, and the relationship may be direct. 1, antisocial behavior is inherited. 2, the genetic makeup of parents is passed on to children. And 3, genetic abnormality is directly linked to a variety of antisocial behaviors. Okay, so some interesting thoughts for us to kind of think about. Now, it is also possible, and then we'll get into psychological, that the association is indirect. Genes are related to some personality or physical traits that are linked to antisocial behavior. Okay, for example, genetic makeup may shape friendship patterns and orient people towards associating with either conventional or antisocial friends. And those who maintain deviant peers are more likely to become crime prone. And similarly, attachment to parents may be influenced by a genetic component. Adolescents who attach, whose attachment to their parents is weak, may be more likely to engage in delinquent acts. So again, just a lot of things for us to think of as we talk about these different concepts. So on page 96 in your textbook, there's a little kind of overview that compares biochemical, neurological, and genetics. Okay, all these biosocial views of crime causation, if you will. So what about psychological theories? Okay, so psychological theories suggest that criminals may be suffering from a psychological abnormality or stress that has kind of a long history. And when you talk about that psychodynamic theory, right, introduced by the creation of Sigmund Freud, this still holds a very prominent position in psychological thought. And here it's stated that some people encounter problems during their early development that cause an imbalance in their personality. And psychodynamic theorists believe that law violators may have suffered damage to their egos or superegos early in their development that renders them powerless to control some of their impulses. So they may suffer, delusions, feel persecuted, feel worthless, etc., or even alienated. Okay, so some of the specific disorders that have been linked to antisocial youth are going to be, and we'll kind of talk about it just for a second here. One would be oppositional defiant disorder. This is a psychological condition whose symptoms include rebellious behavior toward authority figures that interfere with proper life function, or what we call conduct disorder, difficulty following the rules and behaving in an acceptable way. And this is also viewed a lot of times as antisocial. We have clinical depression. This is a psychiatric disorder characterized by an inability to concentrate, maybe insomnia, loss of appetite, feelings of sadness, guilt, helplessness, hopelessness. Okay, and then finally, alexithymia. This is a deficit in emotional cognition that prevents people from being aware of their feelings or being able to understand or talk about their thoughts and their emotions. And therefore, because of that, they are kind of viewed as antisocial. All right, so I only usually like to go about halfway through. I'm going to go just a little bit further. We'll finish up with cognitive theory, and then we'll take a quick break. So cognitive psychologists are concerned with the way people perceive and mentally represent the world in which they live. Some researchers focus on how people process and store information, viewing the operation of human intellect as like the way a computer analyzes available information. And what falls under there is something called moral development theory. Okay? Now, this is where people go through stages in life, beginning with childhood, moving through adulthood, and each stage is marked by a different view on right or wrong. Okay? All right, so this would probably be a good time. We're going to stop here, and then we'll get into personality and crime when we come back. So we're right about the halfway mark.